who has to dominate this spring? Who's on the cusp for the Dogs at any position? And we'll exclude quarterback because that's such a microscope position as it is. But how about some names, maybe sophomores, juniors that have been knocking on the door for a minute, where this is, if not a make or break spring for them, this is a spring where they've got to make some moves.
I think Christian Miller is entering a very crucial spring. I started to hear a little bit of buzz about him, not to the point that I'm like, oh man, Christian Miller is making a move. But I think that is a guy who Georgia, not only does he need it, but Georgia needs it. Just simply because you look at the defensive line talent. I mean, he's a big time kid. Another guy is a guy that we brought up here recently, and if you haven't seen it, come on over to DawgsHQ and sign up with us because I don't think anybody else is reporting this. Julian Humphrey. We had some good nuggets on him from last week in practice, some surprising nuggets on him. I think he might be a guy making a little bit of a move, and we got a few more details over on our message board.
Is he one of Georgia's fastest players?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, he's Keely Ringo fast. He's Keely Ringo, Arian Smith, CJ Smith, Chandler Smith, or whatever you want to call him, right there in that area, that Anthony Evans. He's probably he's top 5, top 10% of the team fast for sure.
Jack Moreno says Ratledge needs to take a step forward. He's already a starter, so that's a heck of a take. And Matthew C. giving a shout out to Lawson Lucky, saying that Oscar Delp could get passed up by Lawson Lucky if he doesn't make a big move. And I think, I don't know, based on the way Georgia rolls the tight ends by committee, looking at the way that, we assume Brock Bowers will go to the NFL by this time next year, I would say that Delp probably still have to be in the rotation, but Lucky's going to be hard to keep off. Robinson's an interest.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Branson's a guy. Sorry, Wes, you're cutting out there, so I didn't know what was going on. But Branson's a guy that, 100%, because if Roderick Robinson comes in playing well, and Dejon Edwards, as durable as he has been, you think about Andrew Paul. I have a hard time believing that Paul maybe gets back to 100% to the point that he's able to just like knock off Branson Robinson completely there. But Robinson needs a good spring. And I will say this, man, I was watching them pull those sleds the other day, and I know pulling a sled well and $1 will, $2 will buy you a Coke now, inflation and whatnot. But those two, man, they pulled that sled like Darnell Washington pushed that sled. Like they pulled it like the other dudes were pulling it, and you're like, oh, okay. And then those two pulled it, and you're like, oh, okay. They're a couple mules, man, a couple of horses. They can get after it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of join in on this conversation here too, and on guys that we think we need a good spring. I mean, there's a couple of defensive backs with some spots open there. Tyke Smith, who I noticed that's another name you mentioned, Jake. I would say Nyland Green, probably somebody that needs a good spring. And those two are probably older examples than some may want. If you want to go on the younger side of things, I think the offensive line is an area where you could look at a guy like Micah Morris, who, speaking with Tate Ratledge last week, he pointed out Morris and Jared Wilson and Dylan Fairchild, those guys are really making a push for playing time. And that's something that Stacey Searle showed last season. 7 players on that offensive line played more than 30% of Georgia's total offensive snaps. Two of those non-starters, that did start games, but, weren't a part of the regular, starting 5. Those guys, the Micah Morrises, Dylan Fairchilds, Jared Wilsons of the world, they can have a good spring and push for playing time and kind of earn themselves a spot in the rotation / starting 5 for next year.
All right, I'm late, so I don't know what's been said already. But I've got a couple guys that I would throw in there. I definitely agree with Dylan Fairchild. To me, he just seemed like a name that kind of got lost in the wash last year. Which I've been surprised about. I thought that coming out, he was the guy who was going to be maybe an early name that we'd hear a lot about. I think that one of the guys that really needs it, though, is Ja'Cory Thomas at the safety spot, because you're hearing a lot of buzz about maybe Javon Bullard playing back there right now. Maybe is Janelle Aguero making his move there. Ja'Cory Thomas came in that same class with Malachi Starks as a pure safety. I think it would really benefit him to kind of step up and have a big spring, as it were.
And I also think if you play cornerback, you brought up Nyland Green, Palmer. If you play cornerback at Georgia right now, man, the heat is on because you're probably not going to unseat Kamari Lassiter. And the more I think about the other one, you're probably looking at Dalen Everett, Nyland Green, Julian Humphrey, Smoke Bowie, AJ Harris. All of those guys kind of gunning for it. 5 dudes. And I tell you what, man, if
not to mention that you've got Daniel Harris, who was not an early enrollee that you signed in this class too.
Yeah, or Chris Peel, or Kyron Jones.
Does that contextualize to some degree Jaheim Singletary?
Yeah,
looking further.
Yeah.
No, and I don't know about contextualize. I think it might just explain it. This is the reason. But no, I mean it's and honestly, if I'm one of those guys, man, I don't know. I can't speak for any of them really, but you hear so often, hey, cornerbacks don't want to play nickel. They want to play cornerback. That's where it's at. Well, man, I don't know, dude. If you know you're going to be at Georgia this next year, maybe you dig in and you say, I'm going to beat out Javon Bullard for this, or I'm going to play this position as well as Javon Bullard plays it so that he can play safety, or I'm going to beat out Tyke Smith, or I'm going to do something to separate, myself for that spot because – I mean, there's playing time available, and I honestly, I don't know if that's the case at Georgia, but you hear it a lot from evaluators. I talked to the NFL scouts who talk about it. They're like, "Yeah, he transferred because they wanted him to play. They thought he could play nickel, and he didn't want to play nickel. He wanted to play cornerback."
Have we
Stevenson?
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure.
And that leads to tears. That leads to tears, as Tyreek Stevenson told us. He cried when his team won the national championship.
Well, and listen, I mean, the fact is kids take it as a slight. The nickel corner is somehow demeaned, or, the guy who is I like I said, I got on late and I'm really upset to see that Wes got duped into buying Palmer's internet plan.
I'm just laughing at Matthew Seaver talking about Kent Merker. You know who Kent Merker is?
I don't.
He threw a couple of combined no hitters at Georgia. For the Braves. Sorry, but yeah, he did have a pretty rad mullet though.
Yeah, Uncle Glenn Hartley says I need to do the Brian Bosworth, which I could probably I could get down with that.
Get you some lines cut in here.
Yeah, that'd be pretty sick actually. No, it's the spring is important. It's not a make or break for a lot of these guys, but there are a few guys I think who could benefit from it. Like I said, Ja'Cory was a guy. Xavier Sori is another guy who jumped off the page to me. I don't know if you guys mentioned him earlier. I'm sure you did.
We had, and I hadn't thought about it.
No, Xavier Sori is a guy who listen, with the freshmen they've got and the guys that they also have there ready and available. Again, it's like getting lost in the wash, like I said about Dylan Fairchild. I mean, that's a dangerous spot for.
He's going to need like a Kool-Aid like spring. He's got to blow through a brick wall.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's a big picture of Kool-Aid just bust up in there, and because I don't know, man. I don't have a lot of. I'm kind of like Xavier Sori, like I was about Channing Tindall, and I've kind of given up there. Not saying that he's not a great player. I think he is a great player.
You gave up on Channing Tindall?
Yeah, but as far as being like an every down linebacker, as far as being like a true linebacker, like
I
knew he was a good football player, and I knew he could do some things for you on third down. I knew he wasn't like worthless, but I'd never thought that he was going to be I didn't think he would be the top 3. I didn't think he would start games. I thought he was a role player.
I will say this too. Another name. I'm just scrolling down here looking at guys right now. I think that it would be advantageous if you are Cole Spear to have a nice spring. I think it would be advantageous if you are. Listen, to me, this is a make or break spring. If you're Chad Lindbergh, do you even have a reserve spot? Because if not, maybe you got to look this after the spring session
So I'm gonna point one guy out that's in the comments that I've seen a couple of times. Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, guys, he finished top 5 on the team in receiving last year. Sure, they've got really talented receivers that are coming in, but Marcus is going to be a part of Georgia's game plan because of what he does as a blocker, and he proved last year that he's a pretty damn good pass catcher too.
And mark me
makes some
down.
big catches in big situations.
I said this the other day. Mark me down as a guy who believes Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint is going to have a 10-year NFL career. I think that he is a solid role player in the NFL. He reminds me a lot of Van Jefferson.
Yeah. Well, okay, here's the deal. If you throw back the clock 10 years or 15 years, I would totally agree with you. But now, if you're not a dude, like if you're not like, you bounce around for teams for about, 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then you're out of the league because there are so many receivers flying through air. Look at our recruiting rankings, right? Like I was looking at who does Georgia have committed? Oh, Nikar.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Nikar's committed to Georgia, right? Awesome. He's number 60-something overall prospect in the country according to the On3 industry ranking. He's the number 11 wideout.
Yeah, sure.